Here at Faulkner. I appreciate very much the work that Brother Hilliard's doing in leading the school, and the work that Brother Winkler's doing in heading the Bible department. This school is in the right direction, going in the right direction, and better days are ahead because of the men that are leading the school. It has a good faculty, a good student body. It'll make a great contribution to the cause of Christ here in the state of Alabama and surrounding areas. It's always a joy to be here and to try to say something to encourage the school and to make a contribution to our lives, if that's possible. If I can say something that will help us, pull us away from the world, strengthen our faith, and build us up in the cause of the Lord, I'm glad to do it, as well as have the opportunity of hearing other good men that are here and will contribute to the program. My assignment is the valleys of life and passages of Scripture that appeal to me during passing through the valleys. Life is made up of mountain and valleys. In the 7th chapter of the book of Joshua, there was the valley of Acre. And in Hosea 2:15, Hosea had been through the valley of Acre. His family had faced a tragic experience. And in Hosea 2:15, he expresses the fact, or God through him, that the valley of Acre had become a door of hope. We need the valleys in life. Some of them are tragic. Some of them come not because of our own sin and our own shortcomings, but because we live in a world that is affected by sin. The Bible is a wonderful book. God could have, in His infinite wisdom, simply have given us a book with principles that could have guided us in the scheme of redemption. But in the wisdom of God, He knew that out of the experiences of life and the truth that He provides for people going through those experiences would always appeal to people, stabilize the soul, inspire and lift up, strengthen as people pass through the valleys of life. It's interesting that every epistle of the New Testament is written in view of some problem. And perhaps there is no time and no valley that one passes through where one feels more his helplessness, his loneliness, and his need of God than when death comes. In 1942, on a bright day, sunshiny day, my father called and said, "I'm not feeling good today. I'd like for you to take me to Anniston to the doctor." I didn't think much about it because his health had not been too good, and yet we did not think there's anything serious. Just south of Anniston, and I even remember where we were driving when he said, "I have a pain here," and said, "When that pain hits me, if it lasted, I believe it'd kill me." And he's just as solemn, not with any fear or anything, he made the statement, but I still didn't think about it too seriously. Carried him to the doctor's office and went up with him into the doctor's office. We came down. He went to the drugstore to get a prescription filled, and I went by a place of business to see a man, and he dropped dead in the drugstore. The next time I saw his face was at the funeral home. That was the first real valley that I'd ever come to know. I have never felt as helpless as I did then, to stand beside his body, who had been a source of strength and encouragement, a pillar to lean on, and now he's gone. I felt as weak as I've ever felt in my life. I didn't know where to turn. There I was in the city, alone with him. Not a soul expected that. And that was really a deep valley that I was going through. Then I had a little blonde-haired girl, lived to be 7 years old. On a beautiful Sunday afternoon, she was playing with some matches, caught her skirt afire. She was wearing one of her mother's skirts. And I was at the study in East Gadsden studying a lesson for that night. I received a call. They said Vivian's in the hospital, seriously burned. I went to the hospital. She lived 5 days and then was gone. That was the second valley that I'd been through. Death is truly a valley that one walks through that's you cannot understand it until you've experienced it. To lose a father, to lose a child, and then stand in the silence and the loneliness of all of that. How do you deal with it? If someone had asked me, what would you do? How could you handle it? If almost in a moment of time your little girl was taken away from you, I would have said, I can't do it. I wouldn't know how to do it. But the time came. Where would I turn? Paul had gone into Thessalonica and had preached the gospel to a pagan, darkened world. Paganism was a hopeless world. Ephesians 2:12 describes the world without God as being without God and without hope. And Paul had brought the brightness of the gospel of Christ, the light of immortality, into that dark and pagan city. People had left paganism. For the first time they had found something to live for. They had a hope beyond this world. Paul was driven out of Thessalonica, wasn't able to finish his work. He wrote a letter back to them. Some of them had become concerned over the fact that they had lost loved ones and Christ had not returned. And the First Thessalonian letter was written to fulfill that need. Aren't you glad? I know I am. That even though it was tragic for the families in Thessalonica that lost a loved one, I'm glad that in God's providence some did. For if that had not occurred, we would have never had 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18. And think what a world would be like to stand beside your own dead and not have 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18. That indeed would be a dark and dreary day. These verses indeed are rich. Let me read them in the time that I have and make just a few comments upon them. Verse 13 says, But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not as others which have no hope. How much that must have meant to the people at Thessalonica. Sorrow not as others which have no hope. He did not say that there is not to be sorrow. There's no way that one can give up their own flesh and blood and not feel the pangs of sorrow. It'd be unnatural if such was true. When Sarah died, The record says that Abraham came to bury her and that he mourned. How could it be otherwise? They had left Ur of Chaldees together, had journeyed by faith, had seen their ups and downs in life. Their hearts had come to be entwined one with another. They had become a pioneer for the cause of God in a world that was lost in sin. She had stood by his side, made mistakes like he did, but now one that had walked with him through the valleys of life was now gone. Why would he not mourn? It'd be unnatural. How could a man spend his life until their lives become entwined, their hearts are as one, and then when death calls one, there not be sorrow? And so Paul does not say it's wrong to sorrow. In fact, one of the best things that people can do, and one of God's ways of helping us deal with sorrow, is let the tears flow unashamedly. Sometimes when people lose loved ones and I'm talking to them and the tears will be flowing and they'll apologize, and I say, don't apologize. That's God's way of helping you. Let your tears flow. They become fountains that open up the inside and enable us to deal with sorrow. But then he said that we are not to be ignorant of those that are dead, and sorrow not as others which have no hope. What a wonderful thing it is to stand beside the dead and have hope. I attended a funeral of a Jehovah's Witness. I wondered what the man would say at the funeral. Their doctrine is that when one dies, he is annihilated. That's the end of it. And I wondered, why would a man stand up with aching hearts, a father and a husband, and his body lying before them cold in death? Why even stand up there? What would he say? And I'll listen to see what he's going to say. You know what he said? He called his name and said, brother so-and-so wanted so much to live until the kingdom was set up. He thought he was going to make it. And he almost did. But he didn't. I sat there and I thought about, if that's all that my God had to give me at a time like this, bidding goodbye to loved ones, look out into the world in despair, saying that's the end, they're gone forever, I'd rather God would not give me a book of any kind than to simply give me something that offered no more than that. That's no more than pagan Thessalonica had. They had that much hope. When their dead was gone, hopeless and without God. But note again, he said, for if we believe, faith is the solution to the valley that you go through when death comes. Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Out there is an invisible world with an invisible God to the eye of man, but faith can pierce the veil and see an invisible God seated on his throne with his own Son seated by his side. One that has let the cold and icy hands of death lay hold of him, place him in the cold and darkened tomb. only to burst asunder the bars of death and come forth. Ah, the power of faith to see the Son of God, conqueror of death, hell, and the grave, seated at the right hand of God, and to feel the hope, to know the assurance, it's goodbye, but only for a little while. There'll come another day. This is not the end. And I do not know how people without faith can walk through the valley of death and not allow it to provide for them the things of the invisible world and let them find the strength that comes thereby. But then he said, for if we believe that Jesus died, and there's the cross. Oh, the joy. Now perhaps on Wednesday I'll talk about that, but oh, the joy of knowing that God does not demand perfection to meet him over on the other side. Oh, the joy of standing by the dead and knowing that God did not demand that they had to live a perfect life. I never conduct a funeral, but what I remind the family of the one that is a Christian, don't you forget, just remember that the person that was here was a faithful Christian, but in spite of all of his faithfulness, he has not earned what's over there. Only the cross of Christ made it possible for this one, with his frailties and his weaknesses, to be able to enjoy the bliss that's on the other side. But that's not the end. Not only did he die, he arose. Death has been conquered. The door has been opened. That's not the end. How death looks as we see it as being something that will never be changed. Not anything that we can do about it as we stand hopeless and helpless. But to think about that open tomb, the stone rolled away, tells the story. Death is not the end. There is something beyond. But then he said, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring within. And I like to read the next verse. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain at the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep or precede them. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the air. Notice some of the words in this. Paul said, for this I say by the word of the Lord. How empty the words of men would be to stand beside the dead and talk to a family. How different it is to know that this is the word of one that's conquered death, one that was stronger than death himself, and had said, if you believe, he that believeth in me, if you believe in me, ye shall never die. I am the resurrection and the life. And walking through the valley, when death comes, that provides strength and encouragement. But not only that, he reminds us that Christ is going to come back personally. It must have been a wonderful thing to have been able to live when Jesus lived. Ah, how it would have thrilled the soul to have heard the Sermon on the Mount, to seen his compassion, to watch him as he healed the sick and the lame, gave sight to the blind, healed broken hearts, reached down to the down and out and lifted them up. How wonderful that must have been. I never had that opportunity. But thank God, one day, that same Lord that walked the lowly vale of sin and sorrow and time is going to come back. I'll get to see him with my own eyes, hear his voice with my own ears, talk to him with my own lips. What a joy. What a blessing. That changes the color of death. That robs death of its sting, gives us encouragement, help, and hope. But then in verse 17 he said, then we which are alive. I like to read that. You know, it's interesting that Paul, in writing to the brethren at Thessalonica to encourage them, closed every chapter with a reference to the coming of the Son of God. Every chapter. Somebody will be living when he comes back. Some saints will be on earth when he comes back. I'd like to be one of them. I may not be, but oh, it'd be a joy to be one of them. To never have to go through the dark veil of death. Oh, he'll be there. If that's where my time comes and I walk through that valley. But just think about it. Be living. Be changed in a moment, in a twinkling eye. And prepared to live with God forever. Flesh and blood gone. A spiritual body. The last battle with sin has been fought. The last temptation's gone forever. And now then I've gone to be with him throughout the ceaseless age of eternity. But there's another thought in that verse. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with thee. I have been to some great meetings. Meetings that have thrilled the soul. I remember Brother Gus Nichols came to Montford. First year I began preaching, preached in a meeting, and he baptized 37 in a little country church. That little old town, country place was turned upside down. It was a great meeting. I preached in meetings. Preached in a meeting at Talladega, tent meeting. And baptized 37 to begin the church in Talladega. And that was a great meeting. But you think about this meeting here. Then we which are alive and remain and are caught up together. What a meeting that will be. It ought to thrill the soul, stir the heart to think of a meeting like that. Sometimes I've been back to the cemetery where my mother, father, sister, brother, child are buried. Sometimes I've gone alone, stood there and thought, wouldn't it be great if he came today? What a meeting. And then you think about all the saints that's lived in ages past and gone. And think about that meeting. There has never been a meeting in all time that'll be like that one. That's enough to make every person want to be a faithful, loving, obedient, dedicated child of God. to know that that meeting day is coming, to meet him in the air. And then he adds the phrase, so shall we ever be with him. Think about a land of no separations, a land of no goodbyes, a land of no partings. No wonder Paul closed that chapter by saying, comfort one another with these words. These verses have stabilized me, given me hope, even in the midst of sorrow, joy, because Paul penned them. To stand beside the silent city of the dead and an open grave, and look down into that open grave, how dark it could look, how dark it could be, except for faith. Verse I've already quoted. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When I stand beside an open grave in the silent city of the dead, and look down into that grave as the casket is lowered, I don't see a dead-end street. I see an open door to a better and a brighter world. Faith in God's Son, in His Word, that gives hope to inspire the soul. That's what we all need as we pass through the valleys of life.